Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan. Welcome back to Mana Potion Tabletop, and this is Fractured Sphere. Back in mid-April, an email got sent to me by a man named David McKenzie, talking about his first ever tabletop game. But earlier in May, I got another email from the same person talking about his Kickstarter. Now originally I wrote this email off and let it sit for a bit. But earlier in May, I got another email from the same person talking about his new Kickstarter. The first thing I see when I open up his email is a picture of mechs ready to battle. Now if only every email I got started with mechs fighting each other, some eager Nigerian prince out there would have my banking details. The real kicker was when his email mentioned throwing a tank through a building. Let it be known, I was hooked. So what is Fractured Sphere? In the words of the Kickstarter, Fractured Sphere is a 28mm combined arms mecha game with 3D printable minis. Players battle with mecha, tanks, aircraft, and foot sloggers in a hard sci-fi 22nd century Earth-Moon system. Made with love and admiration for Oldhammer, 70s, 80s, and 90s mecha anime, you can bring your battles to gigantic orbital colonies, the surface of the moon, and the Earth that was home to humanity for so long. The deeper lore of Fractured Sphere is plenty thought out. The rulebook has 106 pages as of the recording of this video, most of which includes lore rather than rules. But when interviewing David, he mentioned his future plans to add to the book. The story of Fractured Sphere starts here on Earth. Several years into the future, humanity takes to the stars and lives among spacefaring habitats floating around planets, with the odd few going down and living on the moon or other bodies in our solar system. The key point to take away is Earth is a no-no zone for the most part. For a few hundred years, the colonies around the solar system live in harmony. Political pacts, economic growth, and general stability fell upon our solar system. That all changed when the Heliochrome faction, located in an orbit around the moon, the declaration of war from the Heliochrome faction sparks a larger conflict among the stars, when they see the Duke's annexation of his target was successful. The two factions you can play as currently are the Heliochrome and the Earth Sphere Unified Forces, or the ESFU for short. The design doctrine for both factions are very different. Although it's important to keep in mind most of the mechs, or powered armor as they're called in the book, were made as a way to further the colonization efforts of humans. So these mechs aren't made for war. That's easier to see in the ESFU forces, as their mechs are a bit more utilitarian with ball joints at nearly every place applicable. The Heliochrome faction has a more night and space theme. You can see this with the armor and weapons units carry. Most infantry look like they're wearing a squire's chest plate. David also gave me a little inside scoop about 3 different factions coming to the game later in its life cycle. But this is just scratching the surface of the universe that is Fractured Sphere. If you want to learn more and read for yourself, the PDF containing the lore is free. Links to everything talked about in this video will be in the description if you're interested. To get more into the gaming part of this game, it's our favorite YouTuber, FPS Diesel.
So I was tasked with telling you how this plays, but I think it'd be more useful to do a little bit of a rulebook review. Over the past year, I've read 20 rulebooks, including the infamous Fatal RPG, which is like 900 pages and filled with things I can't discuss here. This is luckily on the shorter side of rulebooks. So what's good about it is that the layout is clear and denotes where lore stops and rules begin. Ironically, this is a huge issue with rulebooks, mainly indie stuff, but some mainstream stuff I've read too. They feel the need to explain rules with context in the universe, mixing them with stories. That's a bad way to do it. The way the rules are laid out here makes things really easy to read. You want a rulebook to be clear and overall good reference material. Rules should be explained in order of importance, which this one is. So for a war game, you'd need the following generally in an order like this. Rather, it's the order I prefer, though it can obviously change around a little bit. 1. A list of terms mentioned in the rules going forward. 2. What you need to play. 3. A general rule of how units move, so the rulers and stuff like that, how basic rolls would work, how a full turn/round would work, then unit types and the general role that each unit performs, and then at the end you'd want a note about unit special role exceptions or a general statement about how modifiers for each of the units moving forward in the armies list, right? You know, stuff like you need to do a reroll, a save, a buff, etc. those specific unit-based rules should be covered in an army section later on, or in a supplement that's a separate book, further in the book, basically to just separate it for that way. If you're playing this army, this is where all your rules are, and that's what you do. You'd actually be amazed how these fundamental things that make up the syntax and editing of a book don't make it in. So it's really good to see that Fractured Space generally adheres to that rule, though the order can be a bit back and forth. Moreover, the entire rulebook is well laid out with some minor exceptions. But before I get into the exceptions, because it might come off as like a huge list when really they're just simple gripes, let me explain what I like about this. All right, the status tracker for mecha is a huge lifesaver. I really like these as a concept, and it's a great way to denote things in combat rather than writing it down. It uses D6s, hence you need a decent amount of them. Now, I haven't played Battletech. I don't know if they do have something like this, but to me, this thing seems novel. Next, I also build a load of Gundam, and the mecha in this are similar in size to an HG model kit, which is perfect for kit bashing, and something that was sorely needed for Gundam. For some reason, Gundam doesn't have a definitive war game, and there's enough overlap here between Gundam and 40K that we should have a war game for it with up-to-date rules that's popular. Though, is this going to be it? No, and my reasons are the following. But overall, I'd say the rulebook is laid out fine. The gripes I have are primarily personal things or taste things, but this is a review, and a lot of it did bother me as I was trying to look very critically at how this thing was structured and how it would be read by the average player. So for what I don't like, the what you need to play section should be one of the most important, and it should really be a list. Minimize the amount of words here so it's a quick once over for a player. Also, maybe give an average number of D6s you need to bring with you. War games generally require a lot of D6s, and this one seems to require quite a lot of D6s. Generally, I'd just say go buy like a Chessex block of 36 D6s, but it's always nice to have them there and to know how many you'll generally need. Next is clarity of artwork. Now, this one is definitely a pet peeve. Now, the project lead behind this is a great 3D modeler, and I will be buying some of their minis, given we may not meet the deadline for when the Kickstarter ends. But the art in this is definitely giving the quote, learn to draw anime vibes, and it looks really, really amateur in comparison to really great 3D models that stand out and have a wonderful silhouette to them. Overall, Fractured Space is in desperate need of an artist to help build cohesion and build a better, well-readable, beautiful rulebook. Now, I'll also say it's got a lot of Mobile Suit Gundam vibes in it, and I know that's deliberate. I mean, a lot of the lore straight up mentions things like new types, but they call them awakened here. If you don't know Gundam lore, I'm not going to explain it all, but it's got a lot of Gundam in its blood. And I know the original anime looks very jank, but this is dying for a better design or something to help it stand out a little bit. Some of the monochrome art in this book is completely unreadable or completely chintzy looking, and it definitely needs some help. You can tell that it's 3D models that were scanned into the book, and it really doesn't need to be that way. Lastly, the comparison with Gundam is something I can't ignore, right? It kind of needs its own thing, this book. It needs a hook, right? It needs something that makes it unique. Battletech's mechs are hunks of steel driven by mercenaries and proxy wars by dysfunctional elites. Macross is, well, I can't remember much about Macross right now aside from J-pop and the variable fighters and the giant aliens. Pat Labor is mecha built for police work on a smaller scale. Armored cores, depressed mercenaries, battle for corporations in the waste of a world ravaged by capitalism. This needs that. It needs a thing to help tie it together that isn't just, hey, I really like Gundam. And I get it. I like Gundam too. I'm a huge fan of Gundam. But it needs a little something. It needs a little spice in there, something to mix it up. Though, as a one-to-one recreation of Gundam, this is pretty good, and you can kit bash a lot, including the infantry units, which are just straight up like the little men in Gundam. It's really great stuff. But again, that's just a pet peeve, and it's kind of missing that thing that will separate it and make it its own thing. The most popular mecha RPG is probably Lancer right now. And I get that this is a war game and Lancers, it's kind of its own thing, but Lancer has a very specific theme and style to it, and I have a feeling Fractured Space right now kinda is lacking that oomph factor. But really, I think what could help it is an artist getting on board and helping to make things look different or more beautiful. And I know that seems, like Diesel, you're judging a book by the cover, but this stuff is really important, especially when you're on Kickstarter and you're trying to get people interested in your rule set, of which the rule set generally I would argue is good. It's really streamlined. It's not like 40K bloat where there's just so much going on. You can pick this up in an afternoon, right? You could probably teach this to people in about a day, give or take. If they've played a war game, they will know how Fractured Space works. It is not going to be that hard for them, but it just needs a little something to stand out, right? Those pictures that are drawn help bring you into the universe, help get you invested, and help bring some context to the models, of which there is a lot of beautiful context and character with these. So there needs to be a little more thought in the art of the book. Some of it's also just straight up hard to understand what's going on in the image. So there's that. But overall, the layout of the book is perfectly fine and suitable. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It gets right to the point. It does exactly what it needs to do, and it gets out of the way so you, the player, can play, which is by far the most important part.
But more importantly, I have a business degree and I want to talk about money. So how much is Fractured Sphere? The Kickstarter may be over by the time this video comes out, so you might miss out on some special deals you can only get prior to the game's funding. But if you're less interested about that, all the 3D files for minis and mechs are on My Mini Factory and Colts. Specifically on My Mini Factory, you can get 2 free mech STLs in the entire rulebook as a free PDF. David also pre-supported the STL files and left the zip folder I got very easy to navigate. For being a free little teaser, you really get a tremendous value. Heading to the Kickstarter page, you can pick from 7 different pledge tiers, each tier with optional add-ons for a few extra bucks. The supporter tier is just a $1 donation with no real rewards. It's also good to keep in mind David is from Canada, so if the money on screen looks different from our floating exchange rate greenbacks, that's why. The next 2 tiers are both $22 and correlate to the in-game factions. So for just $22, you can get 1 mech, 1 aircraft, and 1 infantry squad for either the ESFU or Heliochrome faction. A midpoint between those is the Dual Edition tier, which gives you both factions' previous model range at a price of $40 or $6.66 per model. I'm counting the infantry squads as 1 model, even though you get multiple versions of those. The next 2 tiers give you the full model range for either faction at $52. That's 9 models total at around $5.80 per model, which in my opinion is a fantastic value for your money with the amount of models you're getting. The last tier gives you the full model range for $92. That's 18 models, which comes out to $5.10 per model. Now the pledge tiers don't include the optional add-ons, but still a big mech model for $5 makes me want to jump with joy. The Kickstarter also has a stretch goal of cavalry/biker units. Final details for those are up in the air, but it's good to know David seems like he has ideas to support the game going forward. Coming from a purely financial standpoint, I can say this game is on the more affordable side of Kickstarter projects. You also get a lot of value from the minis you're buying, even if you don't play Fractured Sphere. I love the mech models David made, and a lot of units make me think of the GameCube game Battalion Wars, specifically the ESFU tank with twin barrels. Now I won't say this is a perfect game. Nothing is perfect and things can always be improved. I do have a few issues with the model range, and you always risk the project never coming to completion with a Kickstarter. Some of the units look a little low res, which I think is a style choice since it's like a retro anime theme. I also just dislike all of the aircraft he made, but that's just a me issue. I have a few issues with the models. David needs someone to help him with graphics, and his marketing needs to be a bit more robust. On the other hand, the models I like a lot. The rulebook is free, the game sounds fun, and it's just a great value for what you're getting. I suggest buying the game, but that's really up to you. If you want it for just a mechs, that's valid too. I've been Jonathan. Please like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to see more of me, you can do a little ritual dance and I might pop up. Or you can head over to our podcast channel, Mana Potion Table Talk. If you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to.